Hello everyone, my name is Donia Nugent. It's my pleasure to speak to you today. As the Academic Counselor of TC Education, I would like to thank the platform provided by Mr. Captain for this opportunity to share my research and teaching experience with international students. TC Education is a professional language proficiency test preparation organization based in Toronto, Canada. At this point, I would also like to take the opportunity to thank my colleagues, Julia Zhu and Elena Liu, for their invaluable advice and support.
Hello， 大家好，我是德伊娜。很荣幸有这样的一个机会呢，今天可以和大家来分享一下我这些年的一些经验。那也非常感谢船长提供了这样的一个优秀的平台。那今天呢，我将分享一些关于国际留学生的一些教学以及研究方面的经验。我是优培教育的学术顾问。那优培教育呢是位于多伦多，是一个专业化的语言考试培训中心。那也同样感谢我的同事 Julia 和 Elena 的一些建议和支持。
I've been an instructor and coordinator at York University since 2008, and I have over 30 years experience teaching, designing and leading English for academic purposes programs. My specializations include modern language teaching methodology for English, German and French, and also modern language assessment methodologies for the same languages. One of my other specializations is personal and social development. This involves a combination of career advising and ensuring the emotional development and academic progress of high school students as they transition from high school into university, which we all know is a very challenging period.
从2008年开始，我担任约克大学的教授以及特别项目组的成员。那我从事语言教育以及领导并策划学术类英语项目呢，已经有超过30年的经验了。那我的其他专长呢，还包括现代语言教育方法论以及现代语言测试测定方法论。并且我还会负责学生的个人以及社交成长。那这个基本上是包括了职业规划咨询以及确保在学生的学习过程当中的一些情绪或者是心理咨询。那帮助学生呢过渡到从高中到大学以及从本科到研究生的学习过程。
So at York University, my main role is to teach a variety of bridging programs, which are for high school students to transition them into undergraduate studies, or alternately for undergraduate students or university graduates or internationally educated professionals to transition into master's or PhD studies in North America. I have a broad international and multicultural background, gained through extensive experience with students of over 80 different countries, and I've worked and lived in over 30 countries. From my personal background, I was born in Germany, so German is actually my first language. I come from an exceedingly multicultural family. English is actually my third language.
那我在约克大学的主要工作呢，是帮助学生，从这个高中然后过渡到大学，或者甚至是于从本科学习过渡到研究生学习以及博士生学习的这样的一个过程。那我积累了广泛的国际化以及多元文化的这样背景，我曾经与来自80多个国家的留学生交流，并且呢，我在超过30多个国家工作过以及居住过。那我个人的背景呢，我是出生在德国，所以德语是我的第一语言。我生长在一个多元文化的家庭里，那英语呢，其实是我的第3语言。
Despite the fact that English is my third language, most people think I'm a native speaker, and this is a point to which I would like to come back later to kind of discuss as to why that might be the case. Now, one thing that many people have forgotten or seem to have forgotten is that 50 years ago, language teaching in Western countries was very similar to that in Asia. There was a great focus on grammar exercises and writing and translation. As a result, when students graduated from high school or from university, they were not able to communicate fluently. And this created a problem. The first problem really is that the sole purpose of learning a language is for communication. That's why we learn languages.
那尽管英语是我的第三语言，但是呢，很多人会认为英语是我的母语。那这一点呢，我也会稍后来跟大家做一下这个解释。在其实50年前呢，西方国家的语言教育和学习和亚洲国家是非常相似的，也就是教学会侧重在语法的练习以及写作还有翻译。那这样产生的结果呢，就是学生在大学或者是高中毕业之后不能够流利的沟通，而这会引起一系列的问题。那第一个问题呢，就是学习语言的目的其实是为了沟通。
The second problem was, as anybody who will ever have seen a map of Europe would realize very quickly, is that your language learning is of enormous social and economic significance due to the large number of countries and languages in a relatively small area. The failure of the language education became a huge political issue as a result. So the first result of this was that there was a lot of research, a great deal of research into what constitutes effective language learning, and this was the beginning of what was termed the communicative revolution. The second result was that the University of Cambridge, which had been a leader for over 100 years of research into English language learning.
那第二个引起的问题呢，就是如果有人看过欧洲的地图，那你会认识到语言的学习其实在经济和社会两个方面对于欧洲的国家来讲都至关的重要，因为在有限的土地上共存着许多的国家，所以呢，语言教育的这样的一个失败就成为了一个极大的政治问题。那与此产生的结果的第一个就是开始进行了大量的对于如何有效的进行语言学习的研究，那这也是沟通式教育法改革产生的原因。那第二个结果呢，就是剑桥大学在当时作为一个世界顶尖的院校领衔了这样的一个研究。
University of Cambridge identified the top 3 goals in language learning as vocabulary, collocation, and register. And I'll explain those in a moment. But what would be maybe worthwhile to note at this point is that grammar is not in the top 3. So vocabulary, I think, is obvious to everybody. If you want to learn a language, we need words. Collocation. Collocation means words that we usually use together. And the problem here is that this is not, there are no rules for this. So this is a matter of habit and practice. And every language has its own collocation, and occasionally, the collocation might be the same as in your first language, but usually not.
那剑桥大学呢，研究发现了在语言学习过程当中的前3个重要目标，分别是词汇、词汇的搭配使用以及文体。那稍后呢，我会各自来解释一下，但是现在我们需要明确的是，语法并不在前3位之中。那显而易见，我们的词汇是非常重要的。那么第二个词汇的搭配使用呢，是说有一些词汇我们会放在一起来使用。那这个并不基于任何的语法规则，它只是基于我们的习惯以及日常的练习。那可能和中文来讲会有一些相同的表达方式，但是更多的情况下是不同的。
I would like to give a very simple example of a collocation. So, for example, in English we say black and white. We don't say white and black. Now in Chinese it happens to be the same. However, in some other languages, for example in Spanish, it's blanco y negro. It's white and black. And then if they're learning English, they think, why is it so strange in English? So the problem is that very often if the collocation in your first language is similar to that in English, then it seems obvious. But unfortunately, they are often not similar. And so if students are translating from Chinese into English, that gets them into a lot of trouble. They have to learn what the usual collocations are in English. What words will a native speaker naturally use together?
那接下来呢，我给大家举一个非常简单的例子。在英文当中呢，我们会说黑与白。那很巧合的是，在中文当中我们也这样去说，但是在西班牙语当中，人们说的是白与黑。所以呢，如果你的本语的词汇的搭配使用和英语是类似的，那么这就非常的轻松。但是如果本语的词汇搭配使用和英文不同，如果我们的学生是尝试着将中文简单的翻译成英文，那么就会出现很大的问题，因为他需要弄明白的是因为他们需要明白的是以英文为母语的人们是如何自然的使用这些词汇搭配的。
The third element, or the third of the top three, is register. And again, I would like to give a simple example. Register refers to the type of language, vocabulary, grammar, and sentence structure that we use in different situations in life. So, for example, if you're emailing your friend, you don't use exactly the same language as if you're emailing your boss or your professor. In your first language, in your native language, that seems obvious because you've learned the language together with the situations as you were growing up. However, if you're learning a language in school, you've learned all the language in the same situation in the classroom.
那第三点呢，就是文体。那它呢，指的是在不同的情形当中，我们需要采用不同类型的语言、词汇以及语法。那比如说，当我们给朋友写邮件的时候，我们不会采用给我们的领导或者是给我们的教授写邮件的口气。所以呢，所以在我们的第一语言当中，很显而易见的是，我们会根据不同的情形来选择不同的语言。但是在学英文的过程当中，我们的情形就只是在学校当中学习。
The third result of this research and into education was the decision to model second language learning, or as it's termed, L2 acquisition, on L1 acquisition, or native language learning. Why? Well, we all know that first language acquisition or native language learning works exceedingly well. Millions, billions of native speakers are able to reach very high levels of fluency and accuracy in their native language or mother tongue.
那么第三个结果呢，就是当时的研究学家就决定，以第一语言学习的过程作为模板，复制，并且模仿到第二语言的学习当中。那为什么这样做呢？因为我们都知道，第一语言的学习是极其有效的。无数的母语使用者在使用本族语言的时候，能够达到非常高的流利度以及准确性。
So if we look at what are the main characteristics of L1 acquisition or native language learning, we note that at a very, very early age, there is modeling by native speakers, usually parents, family, friends, etc., which the child will copy. We have a lot of oral language production, speaking as much as possible, as often as possible. We have a great focus on fluency, so it's practice, practice, practice. And the focus is on producing as much language as possible, whether speaking or later on writing, in a very supportive, non-critical environment. And what I mean by that is there are no exams, there are no grades, so everything is very positive.
OK， 当我们来分析低语言的学习过程中的主要特点的时候呢，我们会发现孩子在很小的时候，他们的身边有众多的母语使用者，比如他们的父母、家人以及朋友。所以呢，我们的孩子会尝试着去模仿他们说话的方式。并且也会有很多的语言的表达，我们会让他们尽可能多的去练习，并且在这个阶段会侧重的是流利度的提升，经过不停的练习。那不管是说前期的说以及后期的写的这种表达方式，我们都是给他们提供一个不批判的环境，也就是没有考试，没有成绩，给他们的是一个积极的反馈的环境。
The effect of this communicative revolution or the communicative approach was that language assessment, exams, and instruction in most Western countries changed to adapt to the new theory. We stopped teaching grammar. We focused more on language production, speaking, and writing. An example, for example, the IELTS exam, which so many of our students are preparing for, is based on the communicative approach. It rewards successful communication. It does not penalize errors unless they interfere with communication. Another result was a positive marking system, which rewards successful communication and again does not penalize errors.
那关于沟通式教学法的一些影响呢，首先大多数的西方国家的这个语言能力的测定，也就是考试以及语言的授课方式呢，都因此而改变了。也就是意味着在教课过程当中呢，我们不再讲解语法，而更多的侧重于语言的输出，也就是说以及写的能力。比如我们的雅思考试，有很多的学生呢，目前在准备这个雅思考试，它就是一种基于沟通式教学方式的一种考试。那么对于成功的沟通和交流，雅思考试会给予奖励，也就是相应的分值的提升。雅思考试不会因为学生犯的错误而给予惩罚，除非这些错误会影响沟通的有效性。所以这是一种积极的评分系统，它不因学生犯的错误而给予相应的这个分值的惩罚。
There are a number of other linguistic factors affecting language learning and testing. And one of these is that not all languages are the same. And so, for example, there is the difference between something that would be considered a grammatical language, for example, German, and a syntactical language, English. In a grammatical language, German, learning grammar rules and practicing grammar has some benefits. However, strictly speaking, English is not a grammatical language. Grammar rules only work some of the time, and there are many exceptions. In English, a lot of the meaning depends on word order or syntax.
那还有其他的一些影响语言学习的因素，比如其中之一呢，就是并不是所有的语言都是相同的。以语法规则为依据的语言，比如德语，和以句法为依据的语言，比如英语是不同的。所以在以语法规则为依据的语言当中，比如德语，对于语法规则的学习和练习是很有好处的。但是英语不是基于语法规则，那些语法规则只在某些情况下有效，而有更多的是例外情况。在英文当中，很多时候句子的意思是由词语的顺序决定的，也就是由句法决定的。
To try to illustrate this to my students, I use a couple of very simple examples. Because German and English were the same language 1,500 years ago, many words in English are still similar to German, and so even though my students usually don't speak German, they're able to understand this very simple German sentence. Der Mann kickt den Hund. If we look at the analysis, the man is the subject, der Mann, the verb is kicked, and den Hund is the dog. Now in English we have the older word hound coming from the German word Hund. Now in German, if I change the word order or the syntax, and I now put den Hund first, den Hund kickt der Mann, the meaning does not change. Meaning depends on grammar, not word order.
当我在向我的学生解释这一点的时候呢，我会用这样的一个例子，也就是大家在 PPT 上看到的这句话。所以 the man 它的意思呢就是这个人，然后 kicked 它的意思呢就是动词踢，然后最后 the hunt 它的意思呢就是狗的意思。在很久之前，德语和英语其实是非常类似的，所以我们现在依然有一个词叫做 hound， 那么它的意思呢也是狗的意思。所以在德语当中，如果我改变了词在句子当中的顺序，那么句子的含义是不变的。所以句子的意义是由语法决定的，而不是由词的顺序来决定的。
Usually the more observant of my students will notice immediately that it is the endings of the article, so either the den or the der, which tell us which is the subject and which one is the object. So we go on to the next slide and we look at a sentence to illustrate, or an example to illustrate the significance of word order or syntax in English. So one sentence, which is, I hit him in the eye yesterday, again, can be made to have 7 or potentially more different meanings simply by moving one word, the word is only, into all different positions of the sentence. I'm going to read out a couple of them, but we probably don't need to read out each one. And I've put the meaning in brackets.
那一些观察力比较强的学生呢，在这个地方就会发现，这个 der 和 den 这两个冠词分别说明了后面这个词汇究竟是主语还是宾语。那么我们来看下一页的 PPT。我们可以用这样的一个例子来解释英文当中这个词的顺序的意义。这样一个非常简单的句子，那中文的意思呢是我昨天打了他的眼睛。所以呢，我通过去改变一个词汇，也就是 only 指的这个词汇的在句子当中不同的位置，会有不同的句子含义。
So the word that we're moving around in the sentence is the word only. And so, for example, number 1, only I hit him in the eye yesterday. That means nobody else did. Or number 2, I only hit him in the eye yesterday. I didn't slap him, I didn't punch him, I didn't kick him. So every time we move the word only, it is now modifying or changing the meaning of the word that comes immediately afterwards. So it helps students to understand that syntax or word order in English is very, very important, because if I just move one word, it can change the entire meaning of the sentence. And by just moving one word, I can create many different meanings.
比如第一个句子，只有我昨天打了他的眼睛，所以这句话的意思就是只有我打了，没有别人打过。然后第二句话的意思是，我只是在昨天打了他的眼睛，那也就是说我并没有打耳光，也没有用拳头攻击他，也没有踢他。所以这个就不难发现，我只改变了 only 这一个词的位置，就改变了它后面紧接着这个词的含义。所以这样可以帮助我的学生呢更好的理解到，在英文当中词汇在句子当中的位置是至关重要的，因为它会改变整个句子的含义。那通过简单的只改变一个词在句子当中的位置，我可以创造出来很多不同的句子含义。
If we move on to look at the challenges of the academic university environment for our students, we realize that it's for the first time in their lives, students need to process, take in, understand, analyze, remember, and use very large quantities of new information, frequently in a very limited time. Lectures are long, generally 3 hours. Academic readings are, again, very long. With a normal course load, you're looking at 100 to 120 pages of academic reading per week. This input is incredibly information dense. and contains much advanced academic and professional vocabulary.
好，接下来呢，我们来看一下学生在进入大学的时候会遇到的一系列的挑战。那么我们可以意识到，在他们人生当中，他们第一次需要在很有限的时间内去处理，也就是接受信息、理解信息、分析信息、记忆信息以及运用这些大量的新的信息。课程的时间会相对来讲更长，一般在3个小时。并且呢，学术性的文章也会很长，所以每一个周他们大概需要阅读超过100到120页的学术性文章，所以这些信息量是非常非常大的。那并且呢，在这些文章当中会包含很多的高等词汇以及专业性词汇。
Both Canadian and Chinese students struggle with these tasks, which compounds the problem is that Chinese students often try to avoid problems by studying in Chinese, using Chinese translations of the texts, and studying in Chinese study clubs where they memorize, not understand, the academic textbooks. One of the problems is that the translations of these textbooks are frequently not the same as the Canadian textbooks, so that creates another set of problems. And so this approach does not work long term.
不论是加拿大的学生还是中国学生，他们在这些方面都是会比较吃力的。那让中国学生情况更加复杂的呢，是有一些学生会和其他的中国学生一起学习，或者使用一些中文翻译的教材来避免这些问题。他们会参加一些中国学生的学习社团，并且他们在学习的过程当中是会采用背课本的方式，而不是理解内容的方式。所以这种学习的方式在长远来看是没有效果的。
So how can we encourage English language learning for Chinese students? One of the most important things is that we need to avoid focusing on accuracy. Worrying about making mistakes leads to disfluency, which is the opposite of fluency. Students afraid of making mistakes will speak less, not more. And so therefore, they will have less opportunity to practice and improve. In English, we believe that every mistake is a learning opportunity. So we should encourage as much language production, speaking, and also writing as possible. I mentioned at the beginning that despite the fact that English is my third language, most people think I'm a native speaker. I believe this was because I was lucky to be learning my English from native speakers.
那我们能够如何去鼓励中国学生学习英语呢？其中一个非常重要的方面呢，就是去避免完全侧重在语言的精确性上。因为如果学生担心犯错误的话，那就会导致流利度的上升。当他们担心犯一些语法上的错误，那么他们会避免说话，说的更少，那么因此就会失去了很多练习和提升语言能力的机会。那其实在英文当中，我们认为每一个错误都是我们学生提升英文的一个很好的机会，所以我们尽量的去鼓励他们尽可能多的去做语言产出，不管是以说或者是写的形式。在最初的时候呢，我提到过英文是我的第3语言，但是很多人会认为英文是我的第1语言。那我很幸运的是，在我开始学英文的时候，我的老师是一个以英语为母语的本土使用者，本族语言使用者。
Modeling of the language by native speakers as early as possible is crucial. Pronunciation and accent are formed early on, and if you want language learners to sound like native speakers, let them practice with native speakers as early as possible. Fourthly, we should focus on creating as many opportunities for language learners to spend time operating in the target language, in this case English. And it doesn't always have to be studying. It can be equally helpful if they engage with the language in a playful way. For example, by watching movies, joining clubs, and engaging in activities with native or near native speakers as early as possible and as often as possible.
所以尽可能早的以英语为母语的人作为典范来学习是至关重要的，因为发音和口音是在学语言最初的时候形成的。如果呢你想让这个语言学习者听上去更像一个母语的使用者，那么需要让他们尽可能早的和英语为母语的人接触并练习。我们应该为他们创造使用该语言的机会，那么在这个地方就是使用英语的机会。练习的机会并不只是一定要去学习英语的这样的一个状态，学习是可以非常有趣的，比如我们可以通过看电影，或者是尽可能早并尽可能多的去参加一些有英语母语者或者是几乎是英语母语者的社团和活动。
Finally, I would like to look at what we can do to prepare our students for the university environment. First of all, we should focus on giving our students opportunity to gain academic skills as early as possible. They need to improve their academic reading skills, by which I mean their ability to read and understand long academic readings, understanding academic arguments, style, tone, bias, etc. Focusing on building critical thinking skills, which also involves building solid research skills. By helping them to focus on academic writing, focusing on purpose, tone, style, structure, vocabulary acquisition, construct academic arguments, etc., and academic vocabulary building.
好，最后呢，那我们可以怎样去帮助学生在大学的环境当中取得成功呢？那首先我们需要为他们提供尽可能早的一些机会，让他们去学习那些学术类的技能。他们需要提高自己的学术阅读能力，能够理解并且能够阅读并且理解一些长篇的学术性文章，能够理解学术类的论点、学术类文章的形式以及语气和作者的一些偏见等等。那我们要侧重于去建立他们的辩证思维能力，以及培养他们牢靠的研究能力，侧重于他们的学术类写作能力，包括写作目的以及运用的语气、运用的方式、结构、词汇以及如何构成学术论点等，并且要建立学术类词库。
So thank you very much. This is pretty much all that I will have the opportunity to share with you today. Thank you very much for your time and your attention and for this opportunity to share my experience and research with you. If you have any questions, please let me know.
非常感谢有这样的一个机会呢，可以在这个地方分享一下我的一些教学经验，还有一些研究的所得。那也非常感谢大家的时间。如果现在你有任何的问题，可以现在来问我了。
Unfortunately, receptive skills such as listening and reading do require a lot of time to improve, which means basically a lot of practice. However, in particular for reading, it might be useful for students or instructors to focus on specific reading strategies, because reading is not always reading. And a lot of the reading at university or at the academic level or also at high school level is really not reading, but rather finding information as quickly as possible. So students will benefit from focusing on skimming and scanning exercises, reading for detail, learning to identify the purpose and tone of the author, bias, critical thinking. All of these things would help students improve their reading scores.
很遗憾的是，对于听力以及阅读能力的提高呢，是需要孩子投入时间的，也就是需要大量的练习。但是呢，对于阅读而言， 那我们的阅读老师呢是可以给予一些阅读方面的策略以及技巧的。因为阅读不只是阅读这件事情本身，而是需要我们的孩子在很短的时间内找到信息，也就是他们需要培养起来略读、跳读的能力，以及如何去在文章当中寻找细节的能力，并且呢要能够辨识这篇文章的目的啊，以及作者的语气，以及作者的态度，还有就是建立学生的辩证思维能力。
One of the things that I have seen over and over again is that the ESL support for international students in high school in Canada is really not a lot. And I've seen what we term to be international domestic students struggle with English, even though they are doing English in school. So the students might benefit from having some outside instruction, focusing more on specific language skills, on accuracy, on rather than just extensive reading, which happens to be the focus in high school. The other problem is that, again, I've seen this over and over again, is that Chinese students going to high school in Canada tend to speak very little English. So as there are quite a considerable number of Chinese students attending high schools in Canada, it's quite easy for these Chinese students to hang out with their Chinese friends, speak Chinese. I found over and over again that students during the day, even though they're in an English-speaking environment, they actually spend as little time as possible in speaking or listening to English. And that is a huge problem because they are losing out on opportunities to improve their English. So as much as you can, encourage them not to hang out with Chinese friends and speak Chinese all the time.
那其实呢，我发现很多的高中，在加拿大的高中呢，并没有提供非常完善或者是足够的一些语言上面的支持，对于我们的国际留学生来讲。所以呢，我看到很多的国际留学生在高中的时候呢，在参加这些英语培训项目的时候都非常的吃力。所以呢，如果只是去广泛的去扩大他们的阅读量，那么以更好的方式可能是参加一些课外的这个阅读的辅导班。那另外一个问题呢，就是我发现在高中当中呢，很多的学生他们其实不太讲英语，因为呢，大量的高中的中国学生呢，都会和其他的中国学生一起玩，并且说中文。那在这样的一个英文的环境当中，他们却不去听英文，不去说英文，那么结果就是他们会失去很多的提升自己语言技巧的一些机会。所以呢，我们应该尽量的鼓励他们不要总是和中国学生一起玩，或者是总是在说中文。
To answer the question of how important grammar mistakes are, it depends. If you're looking at, for example, the IELTS exam, which is the most common language proficiency test in Canada for university purposes or for immigration, grammar mistakes are only counted in two particular cases. So remember, the focus is on communication. If the student performs the task and communicates successfully, that is rewarded. However, if the error density is very high, it will interfere with comprehension. And so for an IELTS examiner, what you would be saying then is that it causes strain for the listener.
那来回答语法究竟有多重要这样一个问题呢，我们来看一看雅思考试。那雅思考试呢是加拿大最通用的英语能力水平测试，那不管是说为学术性还是移民类。那么在这个考试当中呢，语法只是占到了其中的 2点。那第一呢，就是关于这个交流的问题。所以如果在考试当中呢，我们的考生可以完成这个任务的要求，并且呢能够成功的去起到沟通的这样的一个效果，那么相应的成绩就会有提升。但是如果它的语法错误的密集度过高，那么这就会影响读者对于文章的理解，所以作为考官来讲，这会使他很难去理解这个考生的意义。
If we're talking about writing or speaking, to put it in an IELTS context, what that would mean is that if you, let's say, for example, the difference between a 6 or 6.5 band score and a 7, if you're looking at a 6 or 6.5 band score, perhaps more than 50% of the English would contain errors. In order to achieve a 7 or a 7.5, more than 50% of the English production needs to be correct. The second type of situation which will affect a language score are what are known as fossilized errors. These are generally errors that the student has been making for many, many times, and they tend to be the same kind of mistakes over and over.
那在雅思的写作和口语当中呢，我们可以来看一下6分到6.5分以及7到7.5和7到7.5之间的差别分别是什么。那如果考生的成绩是在6到6.5分，这也就意味着他的写作或者是口语当中呢，有50%的句子或者是表达都存在错误。那如果我们需要达到7到7.5分，那也就需要做到的是50%以上的句子或者是表达是正确的。那么还有一点呢，就是关于考生的惯性错误，有的时候考生会屡次的去犯相同的错误。
There has been a sort of an older belief or a misconception based on outdated research that children who are exposed to 2 or 3 or more languages at an early age would get confused. This is really quite incorrect. I would encourage exposing children to as many languages as possible at an early age. The earlier, the better. The child's brain is, the plasticity of the child's brain is enormous, and before the age of 12, the ability to absorb and adapt new information is spectacular, and this is something then that starts to slow down after the age of 12. So the sooner you can get them into learning different languages, the better.
但其实呢，很多人有这样的一个误解，就是如果孩子呢在一个相对比较早的年龄当中呢，同时接触2到3门语言，那可能我们的孩子呢会觉得非常的迷惑。但是其实这种理解呢是错误的。我会鼓励这些孩子们尽早的去接触到更多的语言，因为这对他们来讲是更好的。在他们小的时候，他们大脑的弹性是非常非常大的，所以在12岁之前，他们去适应一个新的语言的能力是非常卓越的。但是在12岁之后，这种语言学习的能力就会慢慢的减缓。所以如果我们能让他们尽早的开始其他语言的学习，这是最好的。
Actually, I'm not too sure whether taking IELTS classes would help somebody just improve their general English. Obviously, it would have some improvement, but a considerable amount of IELTS classes is spent on test-taking strategies and other techniques, which would be absolutely useless to a student who is not planning to take the IELTS test. I think time and money would be much better spent if the student were to get some academic reading classes where tutors would provide suitable reading materials to enhance his academic reading skills and also vocabulary acquisition, and then probably the same for writing skills. IELTS really, I would not recommend taking IELTS classes.
我不认为，对于这个雅思的学习呢，会给他们有非常大的帮助。那很显然的是，它一定会在某些程度上对于这个孩子的英文能力有所提高。但是如果这个孩子并不是打算要去参加雅思考试的话呢，整个的这个过程会是没有很大效果的。所以我觉得，不管是说时间还是金钱，应该花在一些应该花在一些学术类的阅读课程当中，比如说对于阅读技巧的建立，以及这个阅读词汇的建立，或甚至于在一些写作的课程当中，因为这样子会更有效率一点。
At this point, we would like to once again thank for the platform provided by Mr. Captain and for this opportunity to speak to so many parents. It is, as a non-profit organization, it does constitute a great resource for parents both in Canada and China to provide them with valuable information about education and the academic environment and academic success.
好，现在呢，我想再一次感谢船长提供的这样的一个优秀的平台。那作为一个非盈利性的这样的一个教育组织呢，它为中国以及加拿大的家长们提供了非常珍贵的这个教育资源。非常感谢有这样的一个机会，能够在这个地方分享我的经验。